When my son died, my greedy daughter-in-law said I wouldn't get a single cent from his $7 million. At the office, she treated me like garbage, until the lawyer walked in with an envelope and, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought I'd be burying my only son at 65 years old. Bryan was supposed to outlive me, supposed to be the one standing at my gravesite someday, not the other way around. But there I was, standing in the drizzling rain at Greenwood Cemetery, watching them lower my 34-year-old boy into the ground while his wife of 3 years stood beside me, checking her phone. Bella didn't even try to hide it. While the pastor spoke about eternal rest and God's plan, she was scrolling through what looked like real estate listings. I caught glimpses of mansion photos as she swiped past them with perfectly manicured nails that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. When she noticed me watching, she didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. She just gave me that cold smile I'd grown to despise and whispered, "Bryan always said he wanted me to be financially secure." The funeral home was packed with Bryan's friends and colleagues, people who genuinely loved my son. But I felt invisible among them. Bella had made sure of that. She'd positioned herself as the grieving widow, accepting condolences and speaking about our future plans that Bryan would have wanted. Every time someone approached me, she'd somehow insert herself into the conversation, redirecting attention back to her supposed grief. "Mrs. Morrison," said David, Bryan's college roommate, taking my hands in his. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Bryan talked about you all the time." Before I could respond, Bella appeared at his elbow. "Oh, David, thank you so much for coming. Bryan would be so touched. You know how much family meant to him." She emphasized the word family while looking directly at me, as if I wasn't part of it. David looked confused by the interaction, but Bella was already guiding him away, talking about how difficult this was for her as a young widow. I watched them walk toward the refreshment table, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. After most people had left, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Bella was standing with two women I didn't recognize, probably friends from her yoga class or whatever social circle she ran in. They thought they were speaking quietly, but grief has a way of sharpening your hearing to painful precision. $7 million, one of them whispered. "That's what Marcus told me Bryan's estate is worth." "Well, she deserves it after everything she's been through," the other replied. "Losing your husband so young, and having to deal with his mother constantly interfering." Bella's voice was sickeningly sweet. "It's been so hard. Bryan was always torn between his loyalty to me and his guilt about his mother. She never approved of our marriage, you know, always trying to come between us. But Bryan finally changed his will last month to make sure I'd be taken care of. He said he realized where his real loyalties should lie." My knees nearly buckled. Bryan had changed his will? When? And why hadn't he told me? We talked every week, sometimes more. He'd never mentioned anything about changing his will, let alone cutting me out of it entirely. "What about his mother?" one of the women asked. Bella's laugh was like ice water in my veins. "What about her?" Bryan realized she'd been manipulating him with guilt his whole life. She never supported our relationship, never made an effort to accept me into the family. Why should he reward that behavior? I'm his wife. I'm his family now. I stumbled away from their conversation, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. $7 million. Bryan had been more successful with his tech consulting business than I'd realized. And according to Bella, none of it was coming to me. The ride home was a blur of tears and disbelief. How had I failed so completely as a mother that my son would cut me out of his will entirely? Yes, Bella and I had never gotten along. She was manipulative and cold, always making little comments designed to undermine my relationship with Bryan. But I thought he saw through her act. I thought our bond was stronger than her influence. Apparently I was wrong. My little apartment felt suffocating when I finally made it home. Every surface held reminders of Bryan, photos from his childhood, birthday cards he'd made me in elementary school, the coffee mug he'd given me last Mother's Day that said, "World's Greatest Mom." Looking at these mementos now felt like a cruel joke. I sank into my worn armchair and tried to process what had happened. Not only had I lost my son, but I'd also lost any connection to his life, his memory, his legacy. Bella would control everything now. She'd probably sell his childhood home, throw away his belongings, Erase any trace of the mother who'd raised him alone after his father abandoned us when Bryan was just 5 years old. The worst part wasn't even the money, though $7 million would have changed my life completely. The worst part was what it represented. That my son had stopped loving me somewhere along the way, and I'd been too blind to see it happening. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every conversation I'd had with Bryan over the past few months, searching for signs I'd missed. Had he been pulling away? Had Bella been poisoning him against me so gradually that I hadn't noticed? Or had I really been such a terrible mother that he'd naturally grown to resent me? By morning I'd made a decision. I needed to hear the will read officially. I needed to understand exactly how my son had felt about me in his final days. Even if it destroyed what was left of my heart, I had to know the truth. The law office of Henderson and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming downtown building that screamed expensive. I'd never been there before. Bryan had always handled his legal affairs independently. Another reminder of how separate our lives had become. The elevator ride up felt like ascending to my own execution. I arrived 10 minutes early, hoping to compose myself before facing whatever devastating news awaited me. The receptionist, a polished young woman who couldn't have been much older than Bella, looked me up and down with barely concealed judgment. My department store dress and worn purse clearly marked me as someone who didn't belong in these pristine surroundings. Mrs. Morrison for the Caldwell estate reading, I told her quietly. She checked her computer screen with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a dental appointment. Please have a seat. Mrs. Caldwell hasn't arrived yet. Mrs. Caldwell. Even here, in this sterile office discussing my dead son's affairs, Bella was the one who mattered. I was just an afterthought, a box to check off on some legal form. I'd barely settled into one of the leather chairs when the elevator dinged and Bella emerged like she was walking a red carpet. She wore a black designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, with jewelry that caught the light from every angle. Behind her walked a tall man in an even more expensive suit, clearly her attorney. Bella, darling. The receptionist's tone transformed completely. Mr. Henderson is ready for you in conference room A. Bella swept past me without acknowledgement, but her lawyer paused to look me over with cold calculation. You must be the mother, he said, making it sound like an accusation. I'm Jean Morrison, Bryan's mother. Richard Walsh, he replied without offering his hand. Mrs. Caldwell's attorney. I hope you understand that this process is really just a formality. The will is quite clear about Mr. Caldwell's intentions. Before I could respond, he was already following Bella toward the conference room. I trailed behind them like an unwanted pet, feeling smaller with each step. Conference room A was all mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Mr. Henderson, Bryan's attorney, sat at the head of an enormous table with files spread before him. He was probably in his 60s, with kind eyes that seemed genuinely sympathetic. At least someone in this room appeared to have a conscience. Mrs. Morrison, he said, standing to shake my hand. Please accept my condolences. Bryan was a remarkable young man. Thank you, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Bella had already claimed the chair closest to Mr. Henderson, with her attorney beside her like a guard dog. I sat across from them, the massive table feeling like an ocean between us. Before we begin, Walsh interjected, I want to establish that my client has concerns about any potential challenges to this will. Mrs. Caldwell was Bryan's wife and closest confidant. She's prepared to defend his final wishes vigorously. Mr. Henderson frowned slightly. I'm not sure that's necessary at this point, Mr. Walsh. This is simply a reading of the will. Bella leaned forward with that false sympathy she'd perfected. Jean, I know this is difficult, but Bryan made his decisions for good reasons. He told me he was worried about your financial judgment. You know how you've always struggled with money. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Yes, I'd struggled financially. I was a single mother working as a hotel housekeeper for most of Bryan's childhood. But I'd never asked him for money, never been irresponsible with what little I had. I've never asked Bryan for anything, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Bella's smile was sharp as a knife. Not directly, no. But the guilt trips, the hints about how hard things were for you, Bryan felt that constantly. He said it was exhausting always worrying about whether you could pay your bills. I stared at her in shock. I'd been careful never to burden Bryan with my financial struggles. If anything, I'd gone out of my way to hide them from him. That's not true, I whispered. Jean, Bella's voice took on a patronizing tone. Denial isn't healthy. Bryan loved you, but he also recognized that giving you a large inheritance would just enable your poor decisions. He wanted his money to go toward building a future, not subsidizing the past. Walsh nodded approvingly at his client's performance. Mr. Henderson, perhaps we could expedite this process. Mrs. Caldwell has arrangements to make. Mr. Henderson looked increasingly uncomfortable, but he opened the file before him. Very well. This is the last will and testament of Bryan James Caldwell, dated March 15th of this year. March 15th. Just 2 months before Bryan died. The timing sent chills down my spine. The will is straightforward, Mr. Henderson continued. Mr. Caldwell leaves his entire estate, including all financial assets, real property and personal belongings, to his wife Isabella Marie Caldwell. The words hit me like a physical assault. Entire estate. Nothing left to me, not even a sentimental keepsake. Bella actually smiled. Bryan also wanted me to have his mother's wedding ring that you gave him. He said it represented the kind of love he hoped we'd have. My mother's ring. The only valuable thing I'd ever owned. Passed down through 3 generations. I'd given it to Bryan when he proposed to Bella, trusting that it would stay in our family. Now Bella would wear it or more likely sell it. I think that concludes our business, Walsh said, already closing his briefcase. Mrs. Caldwell, we should discuss the property transfers. Actually, Bella said, her voice dripping with false concern. There is one more thing. Jean, Bryan was worried about your living situation. That little apartment isn't suitable for someone your age. Maybe it's time to consider assisted living. I know some very nice facilities. The suggestion was delivered with such calculated cruelty that I couldn't breathe. She wasn't just taking my son's money. She was trying to institutionalize me, remove me from any sphere where I might inconvenience her new wealthy lifestyle. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Are you though? Bella tilted her head with mock sympathy. Bryan mentioned you've been forgetting things lately. Little things but still concerning for someone living alone. It was a lie and we both knew it. But in this room, surrounded by lawyers and legal documents, her word would carry more weight than mine. Mr. Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Perhaps we should focus on the estate matters at hand. But Bella wasn't finished with her performance. I just want what's best for everyone. Bryan would want his mother to be safe and cared for. I'm prepared to help with the transition to a care facility. It's the least I can do. The offer was generous enough to sound reasonable to anyone who didn't know Bella's true nature. But I could see the calculation in her eyes. Get me declared incompetent, tucked away in some facility, and she'd never have to deal with me again. I don't need your help, I said, standing on unsteady legs. Jean, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Bella's voice carried a warning now. Bryan's gone. Fighting his final wishes won't bring him back. I looked around the room at these people who held my son's legacy in their hands. Not one of them cared about Bryan the person. The little boy who'd made me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day. The teenager who'd worked part-time jobs to help with bills. The young man who'd called me every Sunday without fail. To them, he was just numbers on a page and legal obligations to fulfill. I walked toward the door, my dignity in tatters but my spine still straight. Behind me, I could hear Bella already discussing liquidating assets with Walsh, as if I'd never existed at all. The elevator ride down felt like falling into an abyss. By the time I reached the lobby, I was shaking so badly I had to sit down on a bench outside the building. People walked past me without a glance, just another elderly woman having a difficult day. But as I sat there, something began to change inside me. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. This was about Bella systematically erasing me from my son's life and memory. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. 3 days passed in a haze of grief and humiliation. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop replaying that horrible scene in the conference room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Bella's triumphant smile and heard her voice discussing my son's estate like she was planning a shopping trip. I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Henderson and Associates, and my stomach immediately knotted. What could they possibly want from me now? More papers to sign away my rights to my son's memory? Mrs. Morrison? Mr. Henderson's voice sounded different than it had in the conference room. Less formal, more troubled. I was wondering if you could come back to my office. There's something we need to discuss. I don't understand. I thought everything was settled. There was a long pause. Please, Mrs. Morrison. This is important. Can you be here in an hour? The urgency in his voice made something flutter in my chest. Not hope, exactly, but curiosity. What could have changed in 3 days? I found myself back in that intimidating building, riding the same elevator to the 15th floor. But this time, the receptionist's demeanor was completely different. She actually smiled at me, a genuine expression of sympathy. Mr. Henderson is waiting for you in his private office, she said gently. Can I get you some coffee or water? Mr. Henderson's private office was smaller than the conference room but somehow warmer, filled with family photos and law books that looked actually used rather than decorative. He stood when I entered, his expression grave but not unkind. Mrs. Morrison, please sit down. I owe you an apology. I perched on the edge of the chair, my purse clutched tightly in my lap. I don't understand. He walked to his desk and picked up a thick manila envelope, handling it like it contained something precious and fragile. Bryan came to see me 2 weeks before he died. He seemed troubled, agitated. He said he needed to update his will again, but this time he wanted absolute secrecy. He made me promise not to tell anyone, including Mrs. Caldwell, about this visit. My heart began to pound. What kind of update? He brought me this. Mr. Henderson held up the envelope. A completely new will, along with specific instructions. He said if anything happened to him, I was to wait exactly 1 week after the reading of his first will before revealing this second document. He was very particular about that timing. I stared at the envelope, afraid to hope. Why would he do that? Mr. Henderson's expression darkened. According to the letter he left with this will, he discovered some very disturbing things about his wife. He'd hired a private investigator to look into certain irregularities he'd noticed in their marriage. The room seemed to spin around me. What kind of irregularities? Mrs. Morrison, I think it would be better if you heard this directly from Bryan. He handed me the envelope. This letter is addressed to you specifically. He wanted you to read it first, before we go over the legal documents. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in Bryan's familiar handwriting. The sight of his words, knowing these might be the last ones he'd ever write to me, made tears blur my vision. Mom, the letter began, and I had to stop reading to wipe my eyes. Mom, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and the worst has probably already happened. By now you've been to Henderson's office and heard Bella claim everything I worked for. You've probably been humiliated and made to feel like you meant nothing to me. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But it was the only way to protect you and expose the truth about who Bella really is. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that Bella has been having an affair with my business partner Marcus Webb. I found text messages on her phone that made it clear this has been going on for almost a year. But that wasn't the worst part. Mom, she was planning to leave me. The messages talked about waiting until I took care of the inheritance problem, and then filing for divorce to take half of everything. The inheritance problem, Mom, was you. Bella had been pressuring me for months to cut you out of my will. She said terrible things about you, claimed you were manipulating me for money, said you resented our marriage because it meant less inheritance for you. None of it was true, but she was relentless. She even suggested that your occasional forgetfulness might be early dementia, and that leaving you money would be irresponsible. I played along because I needed time to figure out what to do. I let her think I was changing my will to exclude you, but instead I created that fake will as a trap. The real will, the one Mr. Henderson has now, leaves everything to you. Bella gets nothing except the engagement ring she already has. And even that was a fake. The real diamond is in my safe deposit box, waiting for you. Mom, I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. Every conversation we had, every Sunday phone call, every time you worried about being a burden, you were never a burden. You were the best mother any son could ask for. You sacrificed everything to raise me alone after Dad left. You worked yourself to exhaustion to give me opportunities you never had. The fact that I became successful enough to leave behind $7 million is because of your love and sacrifice. Bella tried to poison me against you, but she failed because the bond between us is stronger than her lies. I know you're reading this in pain, thinking your son stopped loving you. That could never happen. I loved you until my last breath, and I love you still. The private investigator found evidence that Bella was planning something even worse than adultery and theft. She'd been researching life insurance policies and asking strange questions about my health. There were searches on her computer about accidents that looked natural, about poisons that are hard to detect. Mom, I think she was planning to kill me. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm just being paranoid because of the betrayal. But if something happens to me, if I die in an accident or from sudden illness, please give all of this information to the police. The investigator's report is in the envelope with this letter. I'm scared, Mom. I don't know who my wife really is anymore. But I know who you are. You're the woman who sang to me when I had nightmares, who worked double shifts to pay for my school clothes, who never missed a single graduation or school play no matter how exhausted you were. You're the woman who taught me that love isn't about what you can get from someone, but what you're willing to give. If I don't survive whatever Bella is planning, please don't let her win. Use the inheritance to live the life you've always deserved. Travel to those places you used to show me in travel magazines. Buy a house with a garden like the one you always dreamed of. Be happy, Mom. Be gloriously, defiantly happy. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, just like I used to tell you when I was little. Your devoted son, Bryan. P.S. The private investigator's name is Thomas Garrett. His report is devastating. Bella isn't who she pretends to be. Her real name is Isabella Martinez, and she's done this before. She married a wealthy man in California 5 years ago. He died in a suspicious car accident 6 months later, and she inherited everything. The police could never prove murder, but the circumstances were questionable. She changed her name and moved here to start over. I was her second victim, but I figured it out in time to protect you. I finished reading with tears streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of overwhelming love for a son who'd protected me even from beyond the grave. Mr. Henderson had been watching me read, his expression growing more concerned with each page. Mrs. Morrison, are you all right? I looked up at him, clutching Bryan's letter to my chest. She killed him, didn't she? His face was grim. The private investigator's report suggests it's possible. Bryan died in what appeared to be a single-car accident on a road he'd driven hundreds of times. His brakes failed, but the investigation was cursory because there was no obvious reason to suspect foul play. And now we have a motive, a pattern of behavior, and evidence of premeditation. I've already contacted the police. They're reopening the investigation into Bryan's death. I felt something fierce and protective rise up in my chest. The same feeling I'd had when Bryan was a child and someone tried to hurt him. Bella thought she'd won. She thought she'd eliminated the mother who inconvenienced her plans and inherited millions of dollars in the process. She had no idea that my son had outsmarted her completely. What happens now? I asked. Mr. Henderson smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in that office. Now, Mrs. Morrison, we're going to give your son the justice he deserves. And we're going to make sure his real final wishes are honored. As I sat there holding Bryan's letter, I realized that my son had given me something more valuable than $7 million. He'd given me proof that I'd succeeded as a mother, that our love had been real and unbreakable, and that even in his darkest hour, he'd thought of protecting me. Bella was about to learn that she'd underestimated both of us. Mr. Henderson arranged for me to meet with Detective Sarah Chan the next morning. She was a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. We met in a small conference room at the police station, where she spread Thomas Garrett's private investigation report across the table like pieces of a devastating puzzle. Mrs. Morrison, Detective Chan began, I want you to understand that what we're about to discuss is difficult to hear. But your son was very thorough in documenting his concerns, and the evidence he gathered is quite compelling. I braced myself, clutching Bryan's letter in my purse like a talisman. I need to know everything. She opened the first folder. Let's start with Isabella Martinez, which was your daughter-in-law's real name before she became Bella Caldwell. 5 years ago, she married Robert Chen, no relation to me, a 62-year-old widower who owned a successful import business in Los Angeles. Detective Chun showed me a photograph of a man with kind eyes and graying hair. Robert was worth approximately $4 million. He'd been lonely since his wife died of cancer 2 years earlier. Isabella swept him off his feet, a beautiful young woman who seemed to adore him despite their age difference. What happened to him? 6 months after their wedding, Robert died in a single-car accident on Pacific Coast Highway. His brakes failed as he was navigating a particularly dangerous curve. The car went over the cliff. Detective Chen's voice was matter-of-fact, but I could see the anger in her eyes. The investigation found no evidence of tampering, but Robert's mechanic testified that he just serviced the car the week before. The brakes should have been fine. My stomach churned. And Isabella inherited everything? Every penny. Robert's adult children from his first marriage tried to contest the will, claiming Isabella had isolated their father from his family and friends. But the will was legitimate, and Isabella played the grieving widow perfectly. She collected the life insurance, sold the business, and disappeared. Detective Chun opened another folder, this one containing surveillance photos. She reappeared in our city 2 years later as Bella Williams, working as a personal trainer at an upscale gym. That's where she met your son. I stared at the photos of Bella at the gym, her body language predatory as she interacted with well-dressed men. She was hunting for her next victim. It appears so. According to the investigator's timeline, she spent months researching potential targets before focusing on Bryan. She learned about his business success, his family situation, his personality. She crafted herself into exactly what he was looking for. The manipulation was so calculated, so cold-blooded, that it took my breath away. How did Bryan figure it out? Detective Chun pulled out a thick folder marked with Bryan's name. Your son was more observant than Bella realized. It started with small inconsistencies in her stories about her past. She claimed to be from Oregon, but she knew nothing about cities she claimed to have lived in. She said her parents were dead, but he caught her on phone calls where she seemed to be talking to family members. So he hired the private investigator. Thomas Garrett is one of the best in the city. Bryan hired him 6 weeks before his death, initially just to verify Bella's background. What Garrett found was much worse than a few lies about her past. Detective Chun spread out a series of documents, bank records, phone logs, computer forensics reports. Bella had been systematically planning Bryan's death for months. She'd researched his daily routines, his driving routes, his medical history. She'd even taken out additional life insurance policies on him without his knowledge, forging his signature on the applications. My hands began to shake. How did she plan to kill him? Car accident, just like with Robert Chen. She'd been sabotaging Bryan's vehicle, gradually loosening brake lines just enough to cause failure under stress, but not enough to be immediately noticeable. The investigator found evidence that she'd been accessing Bryan's garage at night, using a key she'd had copied months earlier. I thought about Bryan's final weeks, how he'd seemed stressed and worried when we talked on the phone. He'd mentioned having car trouble, said his brakes felt spongy, but the mechanic couldn't find anything wrong. Now I knew why. There's more, Detective Chun continued, her voice gentle but determined. Bella had already started her next relationship. She was having an affair with Marcus Webb, Bryan's business partner, but she was also cultivating a relationship with another wealthy widower she'd met at a charity function. The woman's appetite for destruction seemed endless. How many people was she planning to destroy? As many as it took to build the fortune she wanted. According to intercepted communications between Bella and Marcus, they were planning to wait until Bryan died, let the inheritance go through, then get married and combine their resources to start an investment fund. They saw Bryan's death as a business opportunity. Detective Chun showed me printouts of text messages between Bella and Marcus that made my skin crawl. They discussed Bryan's death like it was a stock transaction, coldly calculating the timeline and potential complications. In one message, Bella joked about having to comfort the grieving mother at the funeral. But your son was smarter than either of them realized, Detective Chun said, a note of admiration in her voice. He'd been documenting everything, recording conversations, preserving evidence. He even had cameras installed in his garage that Bella didn't know about. We have footage of her tampering with his car on 3 separate occasions. I felt a fierce surge of pride in my son. Even facing death, he'd been thinking strategically, protecting not just himself but ensuring that justice would be served. Why didn't he go to the police sooner? I asked. Detective Chen's expression grew sad. According to his notes, he was planning to. He'd scheduled a meeting with me for the Monday after he died. But Bella must have realized he was getting suspicious. The final sabotage to his brakes was more extensive than the previous attempts. She decided she couldn't wait any longer. The weight of it all hit me like a physical blow. My son had died knowing that his wife was planning to murder him, probably terrified and alone in those final moments as his brakes failed on the winding mountain road he'd driven to clear his head. "There's something else you need to see," Detective Chen said softly. She pulled out a laptop and opened a video file. Bryan recorded this message 3 days before he died. My son's face appeared on the screen, and I had to grip the table to keep from crying out. He looked exhausted, haunted, but his eyes were filled with determination. "Mom," his recorded voice said, "if you're watching this, then Bella succeeded in killing me. I want you to know that I fought as hard as I could, but she was always one step ahead. I'm recording this because I need you to understand that everything I did in my final weeks was to protect you and expose her." He paused, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was trying to solve a difficult problem. "I know the fake will hurt you. I know you'll think I stopped loving you. And that knowledge is almost worse than knowing I'm going to die. But Mom, I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. Every choice I made was because I love you, and because you deserve to live your life in safety and happiness." Tears were streaming down my face, but I couldn't look away from his beloved face. "Bella thinks she's won, but she doesn't know about the real will or the evidence I've gathered. She doesn't know that I figured out her plan weeks ago. And she definitely doesn't know that she picked the wrong family to destroy. You raised me to be strong, Mom. You raised me to fight for what's right. Now I need you to be strong too. I need you to make sure she pays for what she's done." The video ended with Bryan looking directly into the camera, his expression fierce with love and determination. "I'll be watching over you, Mom. Make me proud." Detective Chen closed the laptop gently. "Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know that we have enough evidence to arrest Bella for murder. The investigation into Bryan's death is being reclassified as a homicide, and we're also coordinating with Los Angeles police to reopen Robert Chen's case." I wiped my tears, feeling something solid and unbreakable forming in my chest. "When will you arrest her?" "We're moving carefully. Bella doesn't know that we have the real will, or that Bryan documented her crimes. We want to gather every piece of evidence possible before she realizes she's been exposed. We're hoping to arrest her within the week." "What about Marcus Webb?" "He's being arrested today for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. We're hoping he'll cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of Bryan's planning and the depth of his love for me. Even facing certain death, he'd thought of everything: how to protect me, how to expose Bella, how to ensure that justice would be served. "Detective Chen," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "what do you need me to do?" She smiled, and I saw respect in her eyes. "Right now, we need you to act natural. Bella can't know that we've discovered the truth. Can you do that?" I thought about my son's courage in his final weeks, how he'd lived with the knowledge of Bella's betrayal while carefully building a case against her. If Bryan could be that strong, so could I. "My son didn't raise a coward," I said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she pays for what she did to him." As I left the police station, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Bryan's death: hope. Not just for justice, but for the validation that my son had loved me until the end. Bella had tried to steal that from me along with everything else, but she'd failed. Bryan had made sure of that. Detective Chen called me on Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after our first meeting. Her voice was tight with controlled excitement. "Mrs. Morrison, we've arrested Marcus Webb. He broke within 2 hours and confirmed everything we suspected. Bella doesn't know yet. She thinks he's out of town on business. We're planning to arrest her this afternoon." But we want you to be present when we execute the search warrant at her house." My heart began racing. "Why do you need me there?" "Because she's been calling you, hasn't she? Leaving voicemails about settling Bryan's affairs." She was right. Over the past week, Bella had left several messages on my answering machine, each one more urgent than the last. She claimed there were loose ends to tie up regarding Bryan's estate, documents that needed my signature. Her voice had grown increasingly agitated when I didn't call back. "We think she's getting nervous," Detective Chun continued. "Marcus's sudden disappearance has probably spooked her. She might be planning to run, which means she'll want to tie up any loose ends that could connect her to Bryan's murder. You're the biggest loose end." The implication sent chills down my spine. "You think she wants to kill me too?" "We think she wants to gauge how much you know and eliminate any potential threats to her freedom. Having you present when we arrest her will prevent any chance of her harming you. And it will also give you the closure you deserve." I thought about Bryan's video message, his final request that I be strong and make him proud. "I'll be there." 3 hours later, I sat in an unmarked police car across the street from the house that had once been Bryan's sanctuary and was now Bella's lair. It was a beautiful colonial in an upscale neighborhood, with perfectly manicured landscaping that Bella had redone immediately after the funeral. She'd erased every trace of Bryan's personality from the exterior, painting over his favorite blue shutters and replacing his mother's rose bushes with stark modern sculptures. "Remember," Detective Chun said from the front seat, "stay in the car until we have her in custody. We don't want to give her any opportunity to hurt you or destroy evidence." Through the large front windows I could see movement inside the house. Bella appeared to be packing, moving efficiently through the rooms with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. She was preparing to run, just as Detective Chun had predicted. At exactly 2 o'clock, unmarked police cars surrounded the house from all directions. Detective Chun and 4 other officers approached the front door while others secured the back exit. I watched through the car window, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The doorbell rang, and after a moment, Bella appeared at the front door. Even from a distance, I could see her tense when she saw the badges. But she was a skilled actress. She immediately shifted into her helpless widow persona, clutching the doorframe as if she might faint. "Officers, what's wrong? Has something happened?" Detective Chen's voice carried clearly in the quiet afternoon air. "Isabella Martinez, also known as Bella Caldwell, you're under arrest for the murder of Bryan Caldwell and conspiracy to commit murder." The transformation was instant and shocking. Bella's carefully crafted mask of grief and vulnerability shattered completely. Her face contorted with rage as she screamed, "You can't prove anything. Bryan died in an accident. We have video evidence of you tampering with his vehicle." Detective Chun replied calmly as the other officers moved to restrain Bella. "We also have your communications with Marcus Webb discussing the timing of your husband's death." Bella's struggles became more violent. "Marcus is lying. Whatever he told you, he's lying to save himself. Marcus didn't just tell us, Mrs. Martinez. He showed us the bank accounts where you've been hiding Robert Chen's money. He gave us the emails where you planned Bryan's murder timeline. He even provided the receipts for the tools you used to sabotage the brake lines." I watched from the car as Bella's world collapsed around her. This woman who had humiliated me in that conference room, who had spoken about institutionalizing me like I was a broken piece of furniture, was now screaming and thrashing like a trapped animal. "You have the right to remain silent," Detective Chun continued, but Bella was far from silent. "This is all her fault," Bella suddenly screamed, her eyes scanning the street until they found the police car where I was sitting. Even through the tinted windows, her gaze locked onto mine with pure hatred. "That pathetic old woman poisoned Bryan against me. She was jealous that he chose me over her." Detective Chun followed Bella's gaze to our car, then looked back at her with disgust. "Bryan Caldwell chose to protect his mother by gathering evidence of your crimes. The only person he turned against was you, Mrs. Martinez, because you're a murderer." As they loaded Bella into the police car, she continued screaming accusations at me through the window. "You'll never see a penny of that money. I'll fight this from prison. Bryan hated you. He told me you were a burden." But her words had no power over me anymore. I'd heard my son's voice on that recording, seen the love in his eyes as he planned to protect me even from beyond the grave. Bella's lies couldn't touch the truth Bryan had left for me. After Bella was taken away, Detective Chun came to collect me from the car. "Are you ready to see inside, Mrs. Morrison? We need to search the house for additional evidence, and there are some things Bryan wanted you to have." Walking into that house felt like entering a tomb. Bella had systematically erased every trace of my son's personality. The walls that had once been covered with his photography were now bare. The bookshelf where he displayed his college awards and favorite novels was filled instead with Bella's romance novels and fashion magazines. But Detective Chun led me to Bryan's home office, the one room Bella hadn't been able to completely transform. Here, hidden behind a false panel that the investigators had discovered, was a safe containing the real story of my son's final weeks. "He left specific instructions that you should have these," Detective Chun said, handing me a small wooden box I recognized from Bryan's childhood. I'd given it to him for his 8th birthday to store his special treasures. Inside the box was my mother's real engagement ring, a modest solitaire that had been in our family for 4 generations. Bella had been wearing a fake all this time, never knowing that the real ring was waiting for me. Beneath the ring was a savings account book showing an account in my name with $50,000, money Bryan had been secretly setting aside for my retirement. But the most precious item in the box was a photograph of the two of us from his college graduation, with a note in his handwriting on the back. "For the woman who gave me everything and asked for nothing in return. I love you, Mom." "There's something else," Detective Chun said gently. She led me to Bryan's computer, where she opened a folder labeled "For Mom." Inside were dozens of files, photos from throughout his life, videos he'd recorded for birthdays and holidays that he'd planned to compile into a memory book, and document after document proving how much he'd valued and loved me. One file particularly caught my attention. It was titled "Why Mom is My Hero," and contained a 10-page letter Bryan had written but never sent, detailing every sacrifice I'd made for him, every lesson I'd taught him, every moment of love and support that had shaped him into the man he'd become. "I used to think other kids were lucky because they had dads," one passage read. "But as I got older, I realized I was the lucky one. I had a mother who was strong enough to be both parents, who worked herself to exhaustion to give me opportunities, who taught me that love isn't about what you have, but what you're willing to give up for the people you care about. Every success I've achieved, every good choice I've made, every moment of happiness in my life can be traced back to the foundation you built for me." Tears streamed down my face as I read his words, but they were tears of joy and vindication. Bella had tried to convince me that Bryan had grown to resent me, but here was proof that the opposite was true. Our bond had only grown stronger as he'd matured enough to understand the depth of my sacrifices. "Mrs. Morrison," Detective Chun said softly, "there's one more thing. Bryan set up a trust fund that activates upon Bella's arrest. The $7 million is officially yours now, but more than that, his final video message to you is ready to be released." She led me to another computer where a video file was queued up. This one was different from the urgent message he'd recorded for the police. This one showed Bryan in his garden, relaxed and smiling despite everything he was facing. "Hi, Mom," he said to the camera. "If you're watching this, then justice has been served and Bella is in custody where she belongs. I want you to know that recording these messages and planning for this moment has given me peace. I'm not afraid anymore because I know you're going to be okay." He paused to pick a flower from the rose bush, one of my mother's roses that he'd transplanted from my tiny apartment garden to his yard years before. "I want you to use this inheritance to live the life you've always deserved. Buy that little house with the garden you've always dreamed of. Travel to Ireland like you used to talk about when I was little. Take art classes, learn to paint. Do all the things you put aside to raise me." His smile grew wider, and for a moment he looked exactly like the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and declare them the most beautiful flowers in the world. "Most importantly, Mom, I want you to be happy. Not grateful, not relieved, not vindicated, happy. You've spent your whole life taking care of other people. Now it's time to take care of yourself. You have my permission to be gloriously, unapologetically selfish with your time and your joy." The video ended with Bryan holding up the rose to the camera. "I love you to the moon and back, just like you used to tell me when I was scared of the dark. That love doesn't end just because I'm not there to say it anymore." As the screen went dark, I realized that Bryan had given me something more valuable than $7 million or proof of Bella's crimes. He'd given me absolution from 40 years of wondering if I'd been enough, if I'd done enough, if I'd loved him well enough. I had been enough. I had been everything he needed. And now, finally, I could rest in that knowledge. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, watching the morning sun filter through lace curtains onto countertops that were finally mine. The house was a modest Victorian cottage with the garden I'd dreamed of for 40 years. Roses climbing the white picket fence, herb beds flanking the stone walkway, and a small greenhouse where I could grow flowers year-round. I'd bought it with cash, something I never thought I'd be able to say about anything, let alone a home. But Bryan's inheritance had changed everything. Not just the money itself, but the freedom it represented, freedom from worry, from dependence, from the constant calculation of every dollar spent. The trial had been swift and decisive. Bella was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy, sentenced to life without parole. Marcus Webb received 25 years for his role in the conspiracy. The Los Angeles police had also reopened Robert Chen's case. And though Bella could never be prosecuted again for that murder due to double jeopardy laws, the truth had finally come to light for his family. I hadn't attended the trial. Detective Chun had offered to arrange for me to give a victim impact statement, but I declined. I had nothing to say to Bella that would serve any purpose. My son had already spoken for both of us through the evidence he'd so carefully preserved. Justice had been served not through my words, but through his planning and love. The quiet had been the most surprising adjustment. For 65 years, my life had been filled with struggle, financial worry, physical exhaustion, emotional stress. Now, in this peaceful cottage with its paid-off mortgage and well-funded bank accounts, I was learning what it meant to live without fear. I'd followed Bryan's advice from his final video message. I'd enrolled in watercolor classes at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. My paintings were terrible, but that wasn't the point. The point was the pure joy of creating something beautiful without worrying about whether it served any practical purpose. I'd also booked the trip to Ireland that Bryan had mentioned, planning to visit the small village where my great-grandmother had been born. It would be my first time traveling anywhere for pure pleasure, and I was both terrified and exhilarated by the prospect. But the most profound change was internal. The constant voice in my head that had whispered "not enough" for decades had finally gone silent. I was enough. I had been enough all along. Bryan's carefully preserved evidence had proved that beyond any doubt. This morning, like every morning for the past 3 months, I walked out to my garden with my coffee and my son's final letter. I'd read it so many times that I could recite it from memory, but I still needed the physical connection of his handwriting, the proof that these words had come from his heart to mine. The roses were blooming magnificently, descendants of the same bush my mother had tended, that I'd nurtured in tiny apartment planters, that Bryan had transplanted to his yard, and that now flourished in my own garden. For generations of women had loved these roses, and they would outlive us all. As I deadhead the spent blooms, I heard the soft chime of my phone, a text message from an unknown number, which usually meant spam or wrong numbers. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. I know you think you won, but this isn't over. Some of us remember the truth about what kind of mother you really were. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I recognized the writing style, the particular brand of manipulation disguised as moral authority. It was Bella's sister, Carmen, whom I'd met briefly at the wedding. She'd been one of the few people who'd seemed to genuinely care about Bella, and she'd attended every day of the trial, glaring at me from the gallery. For a moment, the old fear crept back in, that familiar tightness in my chest, the urge to defend myself against accusations I knew were false. But then I looked down at Bryan's letter in my other hand, at his words declaring his love and gratitude, and the fear evaporated. I deleted the message without responding. Carmen sent 3 more texts over the next hour, each one more desperate and angry than the last. She accused me of manipulating the police, of lying about Bella, of stealing money that should have gone to Bryan's real family. The messages were unhinged, full of the same toxic delusions that had driven Bella to murder. But I felt nothing except pity for a woman so consumed by bitterness that she couldn't accept the truth even when it was proven in court. I blocked the number and went back to my gardening. That evening, I did something I'd never done before in my 65 years of life. I opened a bottle of expensive wine, a gift from Detective Chun after the trial, and took it out to my garden to watch the sunset. I'd bought a comfortable chair for this exact purpose, positioning it where I could see both the roses and the small fountain I'd installed near the greenhouse. As the sky turned gold and pink, I raised my glass in a silent toast to my son. He couldn't be here to share this moment, but I felt his presence in every carefully planned detail of my new life. He'd known exactly what would make me happy. Not luxury or extravagance, but simple peace and the freedom to enjoy small pleasures without guilt. My phone rang, but this time the caller ID showed Detective Chen's name. I almost didn't answer, worried that there might be some complication with the case, some new threat I'd have to face. But her voice was warm and casual when I picked up. "Mrs. Morrison, I hope I'm not interrupting your evening. I just wanted to check in and see how you're settling into the new house." "It's perfect," I told her, and meant it. "Thank you for everything you did to make this possible." "Your son did all the hard work," she replied. "I just followed the roadmap he left for us. But I also wanted to let you know that Carmen Martinez was arrested this afternoon for harassment and making terroristic threats. Apparently, you weren't the only person she'd been contacting." I wasn't surprised. People like Carmen and Bella couldn't accept defeat gracefully. They had to keep fighting, keep blaming, keep trying to drag others down to their level of misery. "Will this affect anything with the case?" I asked. "Not at all. The convictions are final, and Carmen's behavior doesn't change any of the evidence against her sister. But I wanted you to know that you don't have to worry about any more contact from that family. Carmen will be spending some time in jail, and when she gets out, there's a restraining order that will keep her away from you." After we hung up, I sat in my garden until full darkness fell, feeling the soft night air on my skin and listening to the gentle splash of the fountain. For the first time since Bryan's death, I felt completely safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally protected from the kind of people who would use my love for my son as a weapon against me. In the morning, I would start packing for my trip to Ireland. I would walk the same roads my great-grandmother had walked, see the same rolling green hills she described in the letters I'd found among my mother's things. I would carry Bryan's ashes with me and scatter them in the place our family had begun, completing a circle that stretched back generations. But tonight, I simply sat in my garden and marveled at the journey that had brought me here. I'd started this story as a broken-hearted mother, humiliated and dismissed, believing I'd failed the person I loved most in the world. I was ending it as a woman who finally understood her own worth, surrounded by beauty I'd created and sustained by love that death couldn't diminish. Bryan had given me more than money or justice. He'd given me the gift of seeing myself through his eyes, not as the struggling single mother who'd made mistakes and missed opportunities, but as the hero of his story. The woman who'd sacrificed everything to give him a good life, who'd loved him unconditionally, who'd raised him to be the kind of man who would protect his mother even from beyond the grave. I would carry that gift for the rest of my days, and I would use it to live the life my son had dreamed of for me. A life of peace, beauty, and quiet joy. A life worthy of the love we'd shared. As I finally stood to go inside, I noticed that the roses had opened fully in the cool evening air, releasing their sweetest fragrance into the darkness. For generations of women in my family had tended these roses, each one passing the knowledge and the love to the next. Someday when my time came to join Bryan, someone else would care for this garden. But tonight it was mine. The house was mine. The peace was mine. The future was mine. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.